Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down LIV Adelaide 2024. We're going to be giving you all the information that you need to know to pick out some winners if you are playing DFS or betting for the LIV Golf Tournament here this week in Adelaide. And I got to give LIV some credit. I think this is a great scheduling for them. The weekend that they picked to have this tournament going up against the PGA Tour Zurich Classic, which is one of the lesser tour events, which, by the way, we did a preview of that yesterday. So check out the channel, check out the audio feed if you would like to catch that preview. But I think that this is a prime opportunity for LIV to strike on a weekend where golf is not going to be, at the forefront of people's minds. And I think that they've done a really good job this week of picking a location where they're going to be getting a ton of fans on site that are going to be excited, and they're going to have a lot of guys playing in the event that are going to be excited to be there because Australia is a great golfing nation with some great golf courses, and they've picked a decent one to host this tournament at, and hopefully it's going to produce a pretty good atmosphere. I will say last year, I think this was one of the better LIV tournaments overall when you look at the course selection, when you look at how it played out, when you just look back at how everything went. I think that this was a success for LIV last year, and I think that they're going to look back at it this year as a success as well. But this episode is not about whether or not LIV looks at this week as a success. It's about whether or not you look back at this week as a success. So we are going to break down the course itself, the Grange Golf Club, and we are going to identify what types of skill sets and what types of golf are going to excel here. And then we're going to take a look at the board and see if we can identify some guys who are going to be on our betting cards and in our DFS lineups this week. Because like I said, I'm pretty excited for this tournament. So I am definitely going to be playing some DFS lineups. I'm definitely going to be throwing some bets out there with all the information that I've got. I think I know where I'm leaning with a lot of this stuff, but this episode is going to be presenting this information to you guys and helping you fill out your DFS lineups and betting cards. Now, if you are here for the first time, go ahead and hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel and the audio feed as well. That way you can be notified when new episodes drop. But we're hoping to be back. I can't promise every single tournament because I got a busy schedule, got a lot going on, but I'm hoping to be back for most of the LIV Golf tournaments this week if you are somebody who does watch and bet a lot of LIV Golf, but also I do cover the PGA Tour events weekly as well, so you can get that if you subscribe to the channel. And then also, it's only a matter of time before our preseason NFL, college football, and college basketball content comes back around because right now all those sports are in the offseason. So if you're subscribed, you can be here for all of those. All right, so that does it for the introduction, y'all. So let's go ahead and dive in, take a look at the Grange Golf Club and see if we can figure out who's going to play well here. So LIV Adelaide is going to be played at the Grange Golf Club in Adelaide, Australia. And I got to say, this is a pretty solid venue. My one complaint, which has been one of my pretty much consistent complaints with LIV since its inception, is I don't think there's a great way to watch this on TV in America. I think if you want to watch this live, you're going to have to be watching on the LIV app. I think this will be a prime opportunity for LIV to, broadcast this as it's played in prime time in America, even though it's played during the day in Australia. You could broadcast this, starting at 8 or 9 p.m. Eastern time and, run it through into 2 a.m. or whenever they finish playing. And I think it would be great. But as far as I know right now, their only broadcast in America on TV is going to be on tape delay on the CW on Saturday and Sunday. And no one wants to watch tape delayed sports in 2024. So I think this would be a great event to watch live. Like I said, I do think this is a very solid venue. The Grange Golf Club is a Greg Normam design. It rates out at a par 72 at about 6,900 yards. Now, it was created as a composite of the East Course and the West Course at the Grange Golf Club. And you can see on the map here if you're watching on YouTube that it's a little bit of a weird rounding. They really made it into, kind of some weird selections of holes and just kind of tried to make it as walk friendly as possible, but also making it with 18 holes that would be actually suitable for competition play as possible. So it's kind of a weird construction, but basically on the scorecard, you have a lot of short golf holes at the end of the day. There's one long par 3, number 3, that rates out at about 243. The 12th is the quote unquote watering hole or the beer hole, whatever you want to call it. That is going to be the hole that they are trying to make like the 16th at TPC Scottsdale. The stadium type environment where everybody just goes crazy. There was a hole-in-one by Chase Koepka here last year. I believe you can place a bet on if there's going to be a hole-in-one on this hole again. And given what LIV is trying to create, and given that is just a 165-yard par 3, I think there's actually a pretty solid chance that there's going to be a hole-in-one there. And I think that there's a pretty solid chance that LIV Golf wants there to be a hole-in-one there, and they're going to set up favorable pins for a hole-in-one. So that is something to keep an eye out for, and it's a bet that you can make for this tournament that I would actually be interested in making. Now, on the rest of the scorecard, the par 5s are going to be very gettable as well. But really what stands out to me is just the number of short par 4s at this course. With it only being 6,900 yards, you're going to see a lot of guys on these holes, if they're able to pull driver, they're going to give themselves a wedge into the green. And that's really where professional caliber golfers are able to score, is if they're able to take their wedges out of their bag on their second shot. And so that to me is what stands out most looking at the scorecard. Now, this is a pretty claustrophobic off of the tee course. There are a lot of trees. There are a lot of native areas waiting as well. So I definitely don't think that everybody's just going to be ripping driver every single hole. But if you're able to keep it in play off the tee on most of the par fours, you're going to have a wedge in pretty much every time. There is not really a whole lot of natural water hazards or anything to really deter you if you have a big miss. So maybe guys will end up being more aggressive than I initially thought. And, we'll be able to pull driver and we'll be able to, have very easy shots into this course. Now, just from what I could tell from the highlights and what I can tell from, everything I can see online, there's a lot of bunkers here on this course. It's a very heavily bunkered course, but this is a very Australian sandbelt course. And what I mean by that is it is going to play incredibly firm and fast. The greens are going to be very undulated. And there's going to be these short grass runoff areas off of the greens. This is what you see at Augusta National. It is what you see at Memorial Park in Houston. It's what you're going to see at Pinehurst at the U.S. Open this summer, where if you miss the green, you're not going to be chipping out of a rough where it's real easy to just, kind of scoop the ball and get up under it. You're going to be chipping off of a tight lie, which means that the ball can roll out farther. It also means that you're going to have to be very skillful with your chip shots. Short grass chipping is definitely a skill that not a lot of guys have, and it's going to be something that is going to be in play here this week. It's also an option where if you do have a lot of these short grass lights for chipping, you can just putt off the green, right? And that's definitely going to be an option for some of these guys as well. So that is just something else to keep an eye out for. Now, in terms of comp courses here for this week, I do think that you can definitely look at last year's results. I think last year's results kind of tell a particular little story. Nobody is really going to be boxed out from playing well here at this course because of its lack of distance and because of its lack of, true hazards and kind of teeth as a golf course. So anybody can play well here. I'm not going to rule anybody out here at this tournament. But in terms of pure comp courses, aside from last year's results, I think that Royal Melbourne, which was the host of the 2019 President's Cup in Australia, is a natural comparison. We have a lot of guys in this field who did play in that tournament. I think that Quail Hollow stateside is a decent comparison. Quail Hollow is obviously a lot longer, but it's pretty demanding off the tee with it being pretty narrow. And it's also got a lot of bunkering, a lot of undulating greens, and a decent amount of the short grass runoff chipping areas as well. So I don't think that's a terrible comparison. Last year, Abraham Answer played pretty well here. And he has a pretty good history at Quail Hollow as well as Patrick Reed. So, two kind of natural selections there. TPC Scottsdale, I also think is a pretty good one because of the party environment. It's also a course that plays very firm and fast. It's also not the longest on the scorecard. However, a lot of the comps last year, like the guys who played well at TPC Scottsdale, like Brooks Koepka, did not exactly play well here at this event. So I don't know if there's a whole lot of correlation there, but on paper there should be. And then the two that stand out as the best correlators to me are TPC San Antonio and LIV Mayakoba, both of which were designed by Greg Normam. TPC San Antonio, we have seen Dustin Johnson play well there in the past. We have seen Mito Pereira play well there in the past. We've seen Cameron Smith with a T6 there in the past. Matt Jones with a runner up there. So a lot of LIV guys have played well, in fact, at TPC San Antonio. But if we look back at the leaderboard for Mayakoba this year, you can definitely see, a little bit of a certain story where, not shorter hitters, but like the long hitters weren't necessarily able to, really take advantage of the course, right? Like Joaquin Niemann, not necessarily super long off the tee, but really accurate with his irons as well. Sergio Garcia were the two guys that played in the playoff. Rahman, Burmeister, and Johnson are kind of longer hitters who came in next, but like you can take a look at the rest of the leaderboard, and it's not necessarily a situation where, anybody was boxed out because of distance. I think that's what you're going to see here again this week at LIV Adelaide. If you want to look back last year at LIV Adelaide's leaderboard, I think there's a lot of information that you can get from it. Taylor Gooch pretty much just took this tournament and ran away with it last year, shooting a combined -20 over the first 2 days and really just putting it on cruise control in day 3 and still winning by 3 shots. Anibon Lahiri, Patrick Reed were second and third. Cam Smith, Cam Tringale, Pat Perez were 4, 5, and 6. So really, among those top 6 finishers last year, there's not a single guy in that group that I would describe as a long hitter. They're all guys that I would describe as guys who generally play short courses pretty well, are generally guys who are good wedge players and have good short games as well. You kind of get a few long hitters after that, though, in Peter Uihlein and Dean Bergmeister 7th and 8th, and Dustin Johnson 10th. But I still think that this is a course where guys who are elite wedge players, guys who are good short game players, are the guys who are going to end up faring the best here this week. All right, so now let's go ahead and take a look at the board and see if we can identify some value somewhere. All right, so looking at the board now on DraftKings, I definitely think we can identify a little bit of strategy on where to go for DFS as well as where to go in the betting market. The first thing that stands out to me is pretty much in the betting market, you have like a very clear 3 favorites, and the DraftKings pricing kind of identifies a very clear 2 favorites. Rahm and Niemann are kind of separated themselves above the rest in the betting market as well as on the DraftKings board, and I think there's a pretty good reason why. However, I do think that there's a pretty compelling reason to be made to fade the top of the board this week. And first off is because when you generally look at golf betting, if you're going to bet golf long term, it generally does not make the most sense to try to win your bets on the favorites every single week. I will stand by that strategy, which is why Scotty Scheffler winning has been bad for a lot of golf bettors. But I've given the advice on my PGA Tour shows in the last few weeks, hey, just make a Scotty Scheffler top 10 or top 20 parlay with a bunch of guys. And that can be how you make your money, even if he does win, because he's pretty much still a lock to come in the top 10 or top 20. But anyway, I also think in DFS, last time out at LIV Miami, I was able to have my best lineups fading the top of the board, because what ended up happening was when you fade the top of the board in DFS, not only do you get different by construction because everybody's playing these guys at the top of the board, but also it allowed my last guy in to be like in the low 7 or upper 7K range, as opposed to, playing a lot of guys in the 6K. Because if I'm being honest, a lot of guys in the 6K range on LIV do not need to be in your DraftKings lineups because they just don't really have a very legitimate chance at winning the golf tournament or coming in the top 10 or top 5. So basically, all the game theory this week, including the course, which is a short golf course, which is going to bring everybody into play and is going to kind of neutralize some of the advantage of the better players in the world, like Jon Rahm, like Dustin Johnson, because long irons aren't going to be used. Driving distance is not going to be a determining factor. So I think that everything points to fading the top of the board this week. But at the same time, the guys at the top of the board make such a compelling argument to be bet and to be played also. You have Jon Rahm, who is coming in, by all accounts, pissed off after his performance at the Masters, and he's only just been knocking on the door on LIV all season long. Has 5 tournaments that he's played on LIV, has not finished worse than 8th in any of them. And he's a guy that he wants to get back in that winner's circle for a major championship, and it's going to have to start at playing well here at LIV Adelaide. So I do think that there's plenty of psychological reasons to want to play Jon Rahm, even though, again, everything in my gut is telling me to fade the top of the board. Same goes for Joaquin Niemann, who played pretty well at the Masters with a T22, and this guy has just absolutely dominated LIV this season with a win at Mayakoba, with a win at Jeddah, which, by the way, Mayakoba was one of my comp courses. And oh, by the way, he played in Australia in the swing season and won the ISPS Hand Australian Open back in November. So another guy that yet everything points to playing. Bryson DeChambeau is another guy that everything points to playing. You know, we all know about how well he played at the Masters. Well, did you know that before that he had 4 straight finishes on LIV that were top 9 or better? But also that performance at the Masters, what's really encouraging is that Bryson DeChambeau literally led the field in ball striking at the Masters. He struck the ball better than Scotty Scheffler did. It was just his around the green play and his putting that let him down. And Bryson is traditionally a good putter. However, he is traditionally a poor chipper. It's kind of what happens when you make your sand wedge the same length as your 5-iron. It tends to get harder to chip it. So Bryson, if he can, keep the ball in play and hit enough greens this week and not have to chip to win this tournament, then he can absolutely do so. So to me, like I said, everything points to fading the top of the board, but those 3 guys make a great case for playing. And oh, by the way, right beneath them, you have Tyrrell Hatton, who is 9th place at the Masters, following up his 4th place at Doral. And then Cam Smith, the local guy in Australia this week, who finished 3rd here at this tournament last year. So just everything in mathematically is pointing to fading the top of the board, but yet at the same time, everything in terms of a narrative, in terms of like recent form and data, is pointing to playing these guys at the top of the board. So really, it's just a really tough conundrum with those guys, in my opinion. Now, guys that I think I will likely be starting my lineup with, I don't really know where I'm going to go yet, but I really like the idea of playing Louis Oosthuizen, who's a guy who in his time on the PGA Tour tended to play short golf courses well. In the swing season, he had 2 wins on the DP World Tour, and then has followed it up on LIV with 3 top 8 finishes and 5 starts. And he's playing some really good golf, so I wouldn't mind going with Louis. But I really this week like the idea of starting my lineup off in DraftKings and really starting my betting card off with Taylor Gooch. He is the defending champion in this event. As we mentioned, he pretty much put it on cruise control after the first 2 rounds last year. He has a caddy who is Australian who, according to him, really helped him kind of navigate the firm and fast conditions, helped him out a lot with the chipping and with the greens and how to handle the different types of grass and all that. And it showed on those first 2 rounds with how he absolutely dominated. So I definitely think Taylor Gooch could put in a similar performance. And on LIV this season, he's been solid, but he hasn't found the winner's circle yet. He's had 3 top 10 finishes in 5 starts, 1 of which was a T2 in Las Vegas. So I really do like Taylor Gooch, and I think he's a guy that I'm going to be starting some of my lineups this week. But I also think this is a great course for Abe Answer. He's one of the shorter hitters on LIV, but he is one of the most accurate. In his time on the PGA Tour, much like Taylor Gooch, he tended to play very well at short golf courses, of which this is one. And his one win on LIV this season was at LIV Hong Kong, which was a very short golf course, much shorter than this one. So I do think that everything shapes up very well for Taylor Gooch and Abe Answer, even though, like I said, I'm going to be super duper tempted to go all the way up at the top of the board and play some of those big names. I think I'm going to have to be disciplined this week and try to start my DFS lineups off with Gooch and Answer, because I do think that this is a week where I don't want to go all the way to the bottom of the board to pick players, and I want to be able to get some of that mid-range value. Now, 2 guys that I'm definitely going to be fading are Brooks Koepka and Dustin Johnson. I just don't think that either of these 2 guys, they're not playing well, and I don't really think they care about winning LIV Golf right now. I think they care about winning major championships, and Brooks, it's absolutely showed in his performance. He only has a 1 top 5 finish, only 1 top 10 finish on LIV the whole season, and that's through 5 events. And Dustin Johnson hasn't been a whole lot better. He was 5th at Mayakoba and won the event in Vegas, but hasn't finished top 20 in his 3 starts on LIV since. So those 2 guys are definitely fades in my opinion. However, struggling to figure out what's going to happen with them in terms of ownership in DFS, because they're 2 guys that tend to be very popular, tend to be very chalky plays on LIV, just because they're 2 of the biggest names. They're 2 names that have historically had a lot of success and they're major champions, but they're not playing very well at all. So I don't necessarily know if I can recommend them as low-owned pivot plays in DFS, or if they're still going to be high-owned, because they always are. But those are 2 guys that I'm probably not going to be getting to a lot this week. Now, one guy I do like a lot is Patrick Reed. We mentioned that he tied for third here at this tournament last year. He is an elite chipper off of short lies. That's a skill that he's shown time and time again in his career. He's not super long off the tee, but he's a guy that, when he's playing well and it's a driver wedge type environment, which this one should be, it should suit his game pretty well, and his short game should allow him to escape from situations in which other guys could not. And he's playing decent coming in. He had his best finish of the LIV season with a T9 at Miami and followed it up with T12 at the Masters. We know he's always a dangerous man at Augusta. So, Patrick Reed, definitely a guy who is going to be getting consideration for my lineups as well this week. Paul Casey has also very quietly had a good season on LIV. He's been kind of in obscurity the last 2 years because of all the injuries and all the time he's spent off. But when you look at what he's done, combined with his LIV starts and his one DP World Tour start this season, he has had 4 top 11 finishes in 6 starts, and the 5th best finish was a T14 at LIV Miami. So, if he's able to give us another one of those top 11 finishes at a salary of only $8,600 on DraftKings, that's a pretty solid finish. And he's a guy I definitely think you can put in like a top 10 or a top 20 parlay. I think that he's got pretty juicy odds from what I'm seeing at DraftKings in order to do that. Mark Leishman is also a guy I'm going to be considering. Anytime that you can get somebody like Mark Leishman in his home country, I think that gives him a little bit of a boost. And he's also coming in on his best LIV finish of the season, probably even in the last 2 seasons, if I'm being honest, at LIV Miami, where he finished T4. So Mark Leishman is a guy who is definitely going to get a lot of consideration from me. Now, going down from there, when you look back at the leaderboard last year, one of the names that stands out is Peter Uihlein. He finished in 7th place here at this tournament last year. He is a long hitter off the tee. He's generally not all that accurate, but he's kind of fared pretty well at courses that require accuracy. LIV Golf Las Vegas is another one that wasn't all that long, did require some accuracy off the tee, and he finished T2 in that one. So Peter Uihlein, a guy at only $7,700 on DraftKings, definitely has the upside to go and win this event. Now, another guy that popped up on the leaderboard was Cameron Tringawe, 7,500. He hasn't been great on LIV this season. He finished tied for 3rd here last year. For some reason, the LIV leaderboard, when I keep looking at it, even though the guy is tied, it still gives them a placement. It's weird. Anyway, he finished tied for 3rd here last year. He hasn't played all that well this year, has not recorded a finish inside the top 15. So, it's a question of, course fit versus recent form. If you're basing it off the course, Tringawe is a great guy for that. He's not a long hitter off the tee, but so that means he's not going to be boxed out and not going to be inhibited from playing well here at this tournament, which again was the case last year as he finished tied for 3rd. But out of anybody last year who should be getting points for their finish at this tournament last year, it should be Anirban Lahiri. He was the runner-up to Taylor Gooch with a -7 round on Sunday. He really gave it a pretty good run and only made it a 3-shot win for Gooch. He's been very up and down this season, so I don't really know what to make of his recent form, especially because LIV doesn't have a whole lot of strokes gained data that we can look at. But I definitely think that with his finish here last year, his track record of playing short course as well on the PGA Tour, Anirban Lahiri is a guy that's going to get some interest from me. Now, 2 guys that I don't think are necessarily going to be super high owned in DFS are going to be Sebastian Munoz and Kevin Na. But these are guys who are just kind of boom or bust plays, right? They've shown in the last, few years, they have the upside to win on the PGA Tour. They have the upside to win on LIV. And, you never really know when they're going to do it. There's no real rhyme or reason to it. But at a course like this one where nobody's going to be boxed out, I could definitely see a guy like Munoz or Na, coming in at long odds and playing pretty well and, being pretty solid value plays in DraftKings. Now, what's interesting to me is the lower 7K region on DraftKings has a lot of talented guys that, in my opinion, it's time for them to show up. Like Mito Pereira has not finished better than 32nd or 31st on LIV this season. It's not good. It's not good at all. This is that's supposed to be one of the rising stars on LIV, supposed to be a guy who should contend and win in major championships. We saw him, win a PGA championship through 71 holes is one way of describing it. And so this is a guy who's been really disappointing this season, and it's time for him to start playing well. If you're wanting to be early on Mito Pereira and you're going to trust his talent, playing him this week in DraftKings at 7,100 is a pretty solid bet. I don't think I would touch him to win this tournament outright, though. I feel like that would be throwing money down the drain, but I do think a top 10 or a top 5 at long odds is definitely something that he could do. Caleb Surratt is an up-and-coming young gun on LIV who has been playing much better than Mito Pereira. He's got 3 finishes inside the top 18, which for a guy of his talent level is, a guy that is supposedly the next big thing at a salary of only $7,000 on DraftKings. I think he makes a lot of sense to put in your lineups this week. And I think Thomas Peters makes a lot of sense to put in your lineups this week. This is another guy that we know is supremely talented from all the time we've seen him on the DP World Tour and the PGA Tour, and it has not shown up on LIV in over a year. In fact, through 4 starts this year, he had not recorded a finish better than 30th on LIV, but at LIV Miami, he started to turn around a little bit and finish T9. So Thomas Peters is definitely a guy with some upside, and I think that trio of Pereira, Surratt, and Peters all have a ton of upside there at the bottom of the 7K range. Now, like I said earlier, the 6K range on DraftKings is pretty darn ugly. Matt Jones is a guy that I would be willing to play because of, the fact that he is an Australian native. He did not exactly play well here last year. He finished in 42nd place, which is not great. It's like it'd be the equivalent of missing the cut pretty badly on the PGA Tour. But hey, he's an Australian native. He's a guy who has shown some upside. And so he's a guy that I would be willing to roll the dice on as a 6K value play in DraftKings. Really, for these LIV DFS tournaments, or like if you play a guy in the 6K range and they come in the top 10, you're going to be in pretty darn good shape. You really on LIV, because of the fact that it's only 48 players, you really have to get right probably 4 or 5 out of your 6. And so if you do get a guy that is going to come from this range and end up finishing in the top 10, that's going to give you a huge bonus. Bubba Watson is another guy kind of like Kevin Na and Sebastian Munoz that I mentioned, that you never really know what he's going to do. You never really know when he's going to pop off. And he's a guy that at $6,900, like the talent is worth the price tag, in my opinion, and I would not be opposed to playing him. Brandon Grace is another guy whose talent seemed to usurp his price tag, but he has also been quite poor on LIV this season. Only one top 20 finish, and it was with T15 at LIV Jeddah. Now, the one guy in the 6K range that I'm definitely going to be playing this week, I think he's going to be very popular, though, is Pat Perez. At this event last year, he finished tied for 3rd, in that pretty big group that we mentioned that was tied for 3rd. But I really, really like the possibility of a guy like Pat Perez at $6,300. If you get a performance like that, again, that's just going to be an absolutely elite play. And, I don't really know statistically why he was able to play that well at this tournament, but this tournament, the lack of distance is not going to box anybody out. Anybody can show up and play well here at this tournament. And for whatever reason, Pat Perez was one of those guys here last year. I think he's a guy that I'm willing to go with. You're looking for a little bit of a pivot. Danny Lee is kind of a shorter hitter, accurate off the tee, and this is kind of the type of course that when you look back at his career on the PGA Tour, he would excel at. Even though he has not played all that well on LIV here this season, he has not recorded a finish inside the top 25. But definitely think that this will be the type of course that Danny Lee can play well at. And then Andy Ogletree is kind of in the category of like the Caleb Surratts and Thomas Peters and Mito Pereiras of the world, where he's talented. He's for sure talented, and he's supposedly could be the next big thing. Well, it's time for him to start showing it. He hasn't finished inside the top 28 of an event on LIV here this year. And so what better time at this one where, he's certainly not going to be boxed out for any reason. All right, so that does it for the preview for LIV Adelaide. So hopefully I was able to give you guys plenty of information that is going to help you pick out some winners for your DraftKings lineups and for your betting cards here this week. I'm now seeing through sharing my screen on YouTube that